Hey everyone, it's me again from early morning Toronto. I am on a call today with Scott Doughty. He is a mindfulness coach in Singapore, and what's really cool about today's call is that we're going to be talking about mindfulness during the COVID period. And as we know, there's a tremendous amount of stress and all of that kind of stuff going on in this world at this moment in time. So I actually thought it would be a really good time to bring Scott in. Scott in is a world-renowned coach in mindfulness, and he does a tremendous amount of work in this arena. And that means that if you have any questions or anything like that, this is your moment. So all you need to do is just chime in. I am on, this broadcast is on LinkedIn, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's pretty much everywhere. So if you're seeing this and you have a question about mindfulness or you want to know a little bit more, this is your moment. Stop what you're doing and just have a good watch and a good listen and have some fun. So I'm actually going to bring Scott online as we speak. So Scott, you are now live and online.
Hey Marcel. Hey everybody.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great here in Singapore. Good to be with you here.
I love technology, right? I mean, it's amazing how easy it is for us to just connect so quickly and so easily on the other side of the world. Tell me a little bit about, or at least my audience. Everybody knows me, so that introduction is pretty easy, right? But with regards to kind of your stuff, my audience might not know you so well.
Sure.
I remember last time we were speaking, you had this amazing story about kind of like how you ended up where you are today, right? Let's tell my audience a little bit about that story.
Sure. Okay. I remember that moment. We were in Starbucks, and
That's right.
I feel like we're back there right now, Marcel. But for everybody else, my background has been in the technology industry, and I feel very privileged that I was born during the era of technology. I don't know what else I would have been doing for the first part of my career, but I worked my way up through the tech industry and managed to come over to Singapore. I'm from Australia originally, and really noticed as I took on a lot more responsibility, the demands on me required far more resources than maybe I was putting back in. So I was taking on, and this is something that's really common for all of us as we move up in our careers. We just say yes, we strive, and it's a wonderful thing to achieve our goals. But at some point, we run out of time, we run out of energy. And unless we learn how to rejuvenate ourselves, we start to hit limits. And this is what happened to me. So about 4 years ago, I was running the region for a software company here in Singapore in Southeast Asia, and I hit a limit and I burnt out, which is a very common story that you hear. And I decided that in addition to loving what I was doing, I became very interested in how I was doing it. And I became interested in the science of how we work and how we live and how we operate. And it became my mission to really deeply understand, how can we perform and sustain that performance over time? So what happened to me? I can help people, my colleagues, my friends, my peers, and now my clients to not go through that quite painful experience of, going down the slope of burnout and then having to come back out again. And I've made that my mission. And one of the first things I discovered, inspired by actually a conference at the company I was working at, was mindfulness. And I started learning how to meditate. Actually, the same day I learned to meditate, I decided to take a 21-day break from alcohol, which is now 4 years, 5 months, and about 10 days. So that challenge is still going. And I just started to discover that, very simple things that I could do that not necessarily made me better, but revealed or allowed, who I was, who I really was, how I really am to come through and shine. And that's what I've really been excited about it and made it my mission to help others reveal those parts of themselves as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about burnout, right? So I've actually been burnt out twice in my life, and I we talk about, and I find this generally, right? When I'm talking with corporate, with companies and things like that, we talk about burnout like it's a kind of frivolity, right? We kind of just talk loosely about what burnout really is, until you've actually really experienced what burnout is, right? I remember being so burnt out, driving to work, and without any reason whatsoever, just burst out into tears. And to a point where I was hitting that level of chronic depression, right? Where I could not regulate my emotions anymore. It was just impossible. And people often don't understand how disabling burnout really is for so many of us. And when I kind of discovered I was in burnout, and ended up getting fired from my job because I was in burnout, right? Because back then, this is decades ago. Back then, people didn't understand that, right? You were either a tough guy and you could handle it, or there's no room for you in the company, right? So I remember I needed like 6 months to a year to fully recover from what I had gone through. And a lot of people think it's in your mind, but it isn't, right? It really, it affects your physiology, and it's interesting you mentioned alcohol, because that was my go-to medicine as well. You end up self-medicating, right? Because you just feel so rotten. That at some point in time, you're just kind of like going, okay, I need something to kind of lift me up, right? And so you're gonna grasp the straws. This is what I did anyway, and I started taking whatever I could get my hands on to just kind of keep myself going, and that whole self-medicating process. And I think there are a lot of people in this world who are in that space, right? Who are in a space of self-medication, without maybe even necessarily realizing that that's what they're doing, because they've been in that space for so many years that to them is normal, right? And I know it was for me, and I thought it was the most normal, because everybody in my environment did it, right? How was that for you?
Well, I think you make some very good points, and I think I actually really appreciate you shining a bit of light on burnout, because I was even referencing it a few minutes ago quite frivolously. And it is commonly spoken of. It's a common term, but what it actually means is quite interesting. I don't think everyone fully comprehends what it means, and even I didn't until long after I'd experienced it. So maybe we can have a quick look at it, and the way. And also your point about alcohol. So let's talk about burnout and also alcohol. So starting with alcohol, the way you described it, you were using alcohol kind of in the midst of burnout, but you've probably been using alcohol long before that, right? And the way I look at human performance, I usually have a diagram, which I'll share with you later, but there's kind of an arc, right? And you remember when in that job you're referring to, Marcel, you launch into it, you're firing, you feel aligned, you're energized, you're positive, you've got energy, and you feel good about yourself. You feel competent, and you start to move up. You take on more responsibility, you've got targets, you're getting things done. Now, what we do at the moment, most of us have experienced this, and it's a good thing. It's a good feeling. There's this healthy tension of stress that drives that performance. So stress isn't a bad thing. We need it. To actually have a fulfilling life. Where we go wrong is our ability to manage that stress. And burnout is simply, long-term unmanaged stress. And what is one of the most common socially encouraged way of stress management?
Self-medication, right?
Yeah, alcohol. Alcohol is one. There's many.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, we talk about it as, I'm relaxing after a busy day and having a glass of wine. So that is, one of our stress management tools. If we really look at this and just, more of a mechanical sort of scientific look at it, we have very limited tools. Society doesn't really equip us very well with tools to properly manage stress. And, alcohol is, technically speaking, addictive, toxic poison, right? You drink enough of it, you die. So in the short term, you might feel, and I've got no issue with people that enjoy alcohol, but if you just look at it from a clinical perspective, it's not a great stress management tool. It impacts our sleep. If you impact sleep, it ruins everything. So you and I both use that tool. Mm-hmm. And, we start to try and use more of it. We look for other things. Even exercise, like there's lots of other tools, but, I didn't have the right tools at the time. And the thing with burnout is it's not just being tired, right? And the example you gave, that story really resonated with me, Marcel. And I can remember a time after I had left my job because I just was unable to continue doing it. And I was sitting on a flight to Malaysia, and I had this thought in that moment, I have no idea who I am now. Mm-hmm. Without the identification in that role and the roles previous to it, I've been in tech. It's been it's been like this for a long time. I had no idea, and I felt so empty and alone, and it was such a horrible feeling. And burnout, like I said, not only affects us energetically, we're exhausted mentally and emotionally, but we become quite negative. And this is an energy which felt around the office. But worst of all, and this was something that I don't know if you can relate to, this sense of inefficacy, which means we don't feel good at what our job, like we just don't feel good. And remember that confidence that we talked about coming into that job. We're now over here. We've felt anxiety, overwhelm, exhaustion. We're down here somewhere, burnt out, and it almost feels like this is permanent. And that was really scary for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious to sort of get a check in with you about what I just shared and what your experience was.
It's what actually really resonates with me is how many people are in the same boat, right? It's such a common factor in this day and age. And, so many of my clients, right, are in that same space, and the fact that still today, right, a lot of, especially I think us men, right, we are still kind of taught that we have to be invincible, and that being a leader means that you can't be broken, that you have to you always have to be polished, and you have to be a certain thing, and while you're working your ass off to kind of be successful, you also have to have a six pack abs, and a body of a superhero, right? And there is that stigma, right, with executives, and that constant feeling, therefore, right, that none of us are good enough. Right, it's and I think that's probably a lot more common than many of us would like to recognize. Right, it's just the fact that you're always having that feeling of inefficacy, that you aren't good enough, and that starts translating over into not just our work, but in our private lives. Because it also affects how we can love the people that we're supposed to love, and how we care, and the patience levels that we have with people, and compassion, and all of that stuff disappears, right?
You're empty.
Yeah, you become empty. And the other thing that you also said, which really resonates with me too, and I see that a lot, is the fact that our work becomes our identity. Right, we kind of lose sight of who we really are, right? And maybe that's a really important conversation to have too, right? Is to kind of say, hey, maybe that first step into kind of being able to live that mindful life, right? Is that exploration and that reconnecting of who I really am, right? Who am I as a human being, and what do I offer to the world, as a human being, not as a professional, not as a digital this and transformation. No. As a human being, right? What am I offering to the world, and being able to connect with that and taking that time to kind of might help kind of turn that needle a little bit to more in that centered space, right? So what's your thinking of that?
Yeah, well, one thing that you said, which I provide a different perspective, this notion of who we are, and even outside of work. I think it's one. I mean, well, we obviously have very rich lives. Work is just a part of it. So it's important to, I mean, that's different energy sources. What we do is one energy source, but the people that we connect with, who we're close with, that's all very important, right? To live a fulfilling whole life. But the point I'm trying to get to is, quite often when we talk about, who we truly are, or purpose, there's a sense that it's outside of work. And, one thing that I encourage with everyone that I speak to on this subject is, particularly in these times, right, where there is a lot of things we can't control, a lot of, anxiety in across society. One thing that's really powerful is to come back and look at what you actually do at work. And a big part of it is your mindset and perspective. So I think one thing that I've learned in my journey as a coach, I've spoken to so many people, and at their core, they all want to help somebody. And I've just learned that this is not something that was uniquely special about me or anyone else that chooses that career path. It's innate in all of us. If you get down deep enough, it's there. And it always comes up through coaching conversations. So, coming back to my point, whether you are, whether you feel your job is important or not, I'm pretty sure if you look at it through the lens of service, you will find that you are making an impact, or you can look at it through the lens of like that. So, a salesperson, I guess the mindset that I was in, that, up and up, really I'm focused on my compensation, meeting my targets, when in fact, I feel there's a huge opportunity to connect more with, what am I actually doing? What is my purpose in that role, right? And I guess from a leadership perspective, it's to recruit and develop and empower and, serve my team. And what's that team's role? It's to help their clients. And if you think about the energy, the difference between, answering support queries and, helping my customer be a rock star, I get excited about that, and I don't even do that job. So I feel like there is a huge opportunity to see your whole life from a completely different perspective without even changing what you do as a job, for example. There's so much richness just in perspective and mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and absolutely. And I also think that, on top of that, it is that ability to connect with that at an emotional level. Right. And maybe, maybe that is one of the great powers of mindfulness, right? Is I think, in many of the conversations that I have, emotion is still one of those realms where a lot of people, don't necessarily feel comfortable, right? In exploring and kind of, taking that time to kind of get to know themselves at an emotional level, right? And I know for me, right, with my meditational practices and things like that, that just being able to sit with myself, right, and in all of my imperfections and insecurities and all of these kind of things that might be going on inside of me at that moment in time, but just taking that freedom, right, to just be with me, right, and have compassion and understanding for that vulnerability that we might be feeling. Because I think, it's really interesting that so many people think that being emotional, right, is potentially a negative thing, right? Where we're dealing with, whether it's making emotional decisions or feeling a certain way based on the various different situations we might be in our lives. And there still seems to be, in a lot of business people, this desire to be able to remove ourselves from our emotions, right? That if when we are good business people if we can remove ourselves from those emotions, and that's such a misconception, right? Because you can't remove yourself from your emotions. They're there. They're in our brains. They're inside us. You can't surgically remove them, right? And so when we try to do that, the more that we try to step away from these emotions that we have, actually the harder that they fight back, right? And we can try suppressing, but at some point in time they are going to bubble up. Yeah, and it's going to create some form of emotional outlet, right? And whatever that's going to be, whether it's hitting the bottle, whether it's coming home at night and eating a pound of chocolate cake, or whatever it is it's going to be, or yelling at the people that we care about, right? Whatever it's going to be, it is going to come out. And the reason is because we're just not training ourselves to just be able to live with the emotions that we have. And like you mentioned, when you mentioned stress, not being either good or bad, it's just what it is, right? And the same with emotions, right? Emotions are just emotions. They're just there, right? And it's the ability to see them as, that there are no bad emotions. Being sad is not a bad thing. Being angry is not a bad thing, right? Maybe how we behave in response to those things could be inappropriate, but having the emotions is not a bad thing. And that's a difference between having and behaving, right? And I think that's where mindfulness plays such a powerful role, right? Because it's that ability to give ourselves permission to sit with them, right, and to accept them, right? And without and therefore not behaving based on in certain ways that might seem inappropriate or things like that. So how do you kind of deal with that? Is that something you encounter as well?
Of course, and by no means, like, we're still human. I often say, on no authority, that the Dalai Lama still gets triggered, and I imagine it happens sometimes. But his ability to be aware of that and choose how to respond to that would be milliseconds, and that's kind of what I'm trying to say is that, like, this is I mean, it's a bit cliche, but it's a journey, right? And I've come from a much lower place, I think, than hopefully most people that are listening. But I guess, who's to say, who's to judge? What I find is, like, emotions is just information, right? And just like thoughts, we have the research suggests somewhere between 12 and 70,000 thoughts a day. It's just electrical signals. And, emotions are much the same, and they're very useful. They're highly evolved ways of the body communicating. And like, if there's anger, there's probably it's the prolonged experience of anger. And the way I look at it and what I teach is this notion of dual awareness, and it's something that's proven very powerful for me. And in my relationship. So even the other day, like, I was having a conversation with somebody who was experiencing anxiety, and obviously I want to be empathetic to that and acknowledge and listen. But there's many parts to us, but in that scenario, there's the experiencing self. There's the self that's experiencing anxiety. But we also have the ability through our consciousness to observe, to be the observing self and observe that anxiety is present. And I think this is a skill that, for me personally, I feel like I was relatively immature in terms of my emotional intelligence for a lot of my life, where if anger was present, I would be anger, right? Rather than be able to observe that anger is here. Now, this is a hypothetical scenario, that there may be cause to be in be triggered like that and have to use our, body to get out of the way or whatever. But it's very rare in the modern world, right? Like anger comes typically through emotional reaction to information. Quite often we misinterpret things, but the body still reacts and we feel these triggers. So being able to cultivate awareness of this is what's happening, and there's some tools that, I teach to help advance that learning, is really where things start to get interesting. And that's when we move, I guess mindfulness becomes something that we, it's not so much practicing just to feel calm, but it also helps. It's our eyes open experience where the real results are on display.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite interesting that you talk about, the observer, right, and the experience, and that's something that I teach in my work as well, and especially from kind of the neuroscience perspective, right, is understanding that we all have our own individual experiences from the events that go on in our lives, right, and both you and I can be watching the same movie and have a completely different experience, right, from watching that movie. How often doesn't it happen that somebody comes out and says, "Oh man, I love that movie," and the other person's like, "What are you talking about, man? I thought it sucked," right? And having that different experience comes from two parts, right? It comes number one, it comes from our previous memories, right? The information that's stored in our heads that's come, which has our learnings and all of these kind of things, but also our biases, right? Because we've all been conditioned, right, to respond to the world and to have a certain kind of make sense of the world that we live in that becomes our reality, right? And mix that with emotions, right? And you get a very personalized experience of any specific event, right? And I think that's one of the powers is that ability to be able to separate what I call fact from fiction, right? Is that when we have an event that we feel we're having an emotional experience to, right? We can ask ourselves what part of this event is a fact and what part of this event is simply our emotional experience that is based on, kind of the information that we have, our preconceived notions and biases and all of these kind of things. And, so, can I separate, right, the actual facts, the actual event from the experience that I'm actually having with that? And if I can, then it becomes easier for me to regulate how I'm actually then going to behave, right, and act based on that experience, right? So and this is I think is such a powerful thing in that mindfulness, because it's almost like a circuit breaker, right? Where you can really kind of use that that moment, right, of mindfulness to really kind of just break that circuit instead of going in a full circle, right? Just kind of responding to these experiences that we're having all day long, that's mixed in with our biases and all of that kind of stuff, and to say, hey, stop, I'm going to stop for a minute, right? We're not going to go around in circles and circles like a hamster in a hamster wheel, right? We're actually going to hold pause here and apply some consciousness to this.
Yeah, I think that in theory, that's what we're talking about, right? That's, if I'm feeling angry about something that happened 2 days ago, there's no way that I'm present. I'm not in the present moment. I can't be, because right now I'm talking to you. So if I'm thinking about something and it's making me feel a certain way, then that is a great example of when we're not being mindful. Mindfulness, there's lots of different definitions, but I like a few, like, seeing clearly, seeing what is really going on right now, because it may be a mismatch, right? I'm feeling something, but it's not really relevant to my actual present moment experience. Being awake fully to life, being in the present moment intentionally. And I guess the intentionality piece is quite important in that regard. And I think with your scenario of sort of feeling an emotion and then choosing how to respond, I talk about that a lot. Sometimes it's not that easy. And I think just for people that may be new to this whole experience and you know, these ideas and curious about it, it can feel like a big stretch. And I'll just speak from my own experience. Quite often I'll be aware that I'm having a certain emotional response. I may be feeling a bit frustrated or something. Now, I think there's a spectrum. You know, there's being fully immersed in it and carrying on, for example, to use, I don't know if that's an Australian term, but, you know, being frustrated, right? And I think that may serve a purpose briefly, and we can choose a course of action that's like actually relevant to the real world. But if I'm going to perpetuate that, it's only in my mind, right? From my research, when we get triggered, apparently the chemical reaction that's releasing the stress hormones, cortisol, for example, apparently that can be flushed within 90 seconds. So if we're feeling something strongly for longer than that, it's only because of rumination in the mind. And I guess to be kind to ourselves, which is a really key part of mindfulness as well, one step in the right direction is I'm feeling a certain way, you know, whether it's anxiety, anger, frustration, resentment. We may not be at a place where we can just switch it off, but we can be different in terms of just being that emotion, and we can recognize that it's there. We may label it. You know, like I gave the example before, anxieties. I'm feeling frustrated. You know, I have frustration going on. And I can feel it. It's here. And, you know, that's different to literally being the emotion of frustration. And I find, particularly in my close relationships, being able to communicate or even inquire, you know, with somebody that also has an awareness around these subjects, and you might wake them up to the fact that they're not being mindful, that they're actually living out something that's happened recently. And that's where I find things get really powerful, when you bring this awareness and, you know, people can kind of remind you to, you know, of like, are you being mindful right now? And it can be very helpful. So that's some thoughts that I have around, you know, that it's not literally this binary switch of bringing mindfulness and suddenly, you know, I can choose this path. I wish it was. I'm still working towards that myself.
Hey, aren't we all, right? You know, it's a lifelong process, right? So, you know, it's what I find interesting, you know, as you were talking about that the practice of mindfulness, right? You know, I think something a lot of people tell me, I don't know about you, but a lot of people tell me is that, you know, it's like, you know, I've tried it and that, you know, it doesn't work, or I don't have the patience for it, right? You know, I can't sit still for that long period of time, right? You know, what would you say to people, you know, who kind of say those kind of things about mindfulness?
Yeah, I hear that, and I'll just group meditation with mindfulness for simplicity in this, because it's generally in relation to the idea of meditation, sitting. I often joke that, you know, meditation has the worst PR and marketing team ever, because, you know, everyone's got the wrong idea that meditation is about clearing the mind of thought, you know, sitting in a certain position. It doesn't need to be. You know, I taught meditation to a wonderful couple in the US this morning, and, you know, like, you know, they experiment with sitting on the floor, but I meditate in a chair, or I meditate, you know, I meditate at a work desk, and I teach people to do that as well. So I think just in terms of some quick myth busting, you don't have to clear your mind. That's actually not what it's about at all. In fact, you can't practice mindfulness.
I actually meditate in movement. Yeah. So, you know, so, and that's, exactly. That's one of the reasons why I practice, you know, and even though I you know, I simplified the Tai Chi, just simple because my brain is simple. So I created a simple series of movements, right? That kind of allow me to be most present and meditate. And, you know, so I agree with you. Like, we all have that sweet spot, right? That we, you know, finding that kind of exploring, I guess, right? You know, and then finding what works and going with that. But there is no mandate, right? That kind of says, hey, listen, you have to sit in a certain position, and, you know, and because I, you know, I'm a very kinesthetic person, so that would never work for me either, right? You know, so yeah.
But I think if we look at what mindfulness really is, and it's a skill, right? You could call it mind training. To give you an example of the movement meditation, if you're thinking about, you know, the live stream that you've got coming up with Scott, that's not a great example of a mindful activity, right? But, knowing you and the craft that you've been practicing, that works for you, that anchors you into the present.
Yeah.
And, that's a wonderful example. I find meditation is a really powerful tool that most people can get across because, it's simple to practice. And if you learn properly, you can calm the mind. And I think the people that have the busiest minds are probably the ones that could benefit most from this technique. Just learn. I mean, this is the thing. If you create the conditions for the mind to become still, it will do it. And that's what I teach, right? Like, it doesn't take long. I taught a couple this morning for the first time, and within minutes they're in deep states of restfulness, and then the body follows. So the fidgetiness, that the body, you're putting the body into a restful state. The nervous system is so constantly not in that rest state, and but it responds quickly if you give it the right conditions to do so. And for you, it's the movement. Most of the time I'm teaching people to breathe, at a minimum. That is like the keystone to calming the nervous system.
Yeah, and I also think for a lot of people, it is that also the understanding, right, that meditation is a tool, right? It's a tool to achieve mindfulness. Mindfulness and meditation are not the same thing, right? And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong too. They think that in order for me to practice mindfulness, I have to kind of apply this meditative practice, right? Which is mindfulness is simply being mindful, right? But what do you do to be mindful and to be to fully consciously present and in every moment that you're experiencing, right? That's a completely different art form, right? And using these tools to our disposal, like meditation and things like that, can help us achieve that, right? Yeah.
I've got a very simple example just off the cuff. So for everyone that's listening, just check in where your mind is at right now. And statistically speaking, about half of the audience will be somewhere else, right? And you'd be forgiven for doing so, because this is the nature of the mind. The mind loves distraction. We love novelty. It's a survival instinct. Over millennia, we needed to find new things. So we're wired for novelty. It's unnatural for us to stay so focused on something for a long period of time, something we need to train. And mindfulness is a way that we can train that. But you would be forgiven if your mind is elsewhere. Being mindful, we can practice it right now. So wherever your mind is, just bring it back into this live stream intentionally. And that is mindfulness. And I would encourage you, when many of us are doing Zoom meetings, that is a wonderful way to start practicing mindfulness. There's some things you can do before the meeting, but plain and simple, listen. Listen to understand is a form of mindfulness. Listen without playing on your phone or checking the email in the background. This is something that we can all do very easily. Start practicing mindfulness without having to do meditation if that's not yet of interest. And I think I believe that when we're more present, people notice it, right? They may not say anything, but it's sensed. So I think we can all take something away from this live stream where, and also back-to-back meetings. Just to add to this, I can't help myself, but I talk about this quite a bit. Some of us can't help back-to-backs, but some of us do have control over our schedules. So even if you don't, before you jump into that Zoom, just taking a moment, even to take one deep conscious breath, that does amazing things for our nervous system. Very subtle, and if you breathe more, you'll feel a real shift, but it brings you into the moment. The breath is a great anchor for bringing you into the present. So, level 1 skill, but probably the most powerful. And then set an intention for that meeting. Like, remind yourself what it is that you're on this call for, right? Rather than just blasting into it and just showing up, because you make an impact. Whether you say a word or not, your presence is going to have an impact on that experience. It might as well be a positive one. If you ground yourself, be clear on what it is that you're trying to do, and listen. If your role's there to be supportive, or to deeply understand a customer's requirements, don't be thinking about the meeting you've got after. When you do, because you will, that is your chance to practice mindfulness. It's like being in the gym. You know, when you get a thought, it's like a bicep curl out here. When you realize you're thinking and you bring your mind back into the conversation, that is mindfulness in its purest form. So we can all practice this very easily, you know, during our workday.
Mm-hmm. If you had any you know, I guess suggestion, because I'm sure people, you know, who watch this video, they might be thinking about it, right? And they might kind of say, hey, you know what, especially in this crazy world that we live in, and like you said, you know, the very virtual world, you know, but who might be saying, hey, you know, I want to get started, right? I really want to kind of start practicing this. What would be kind of a simple, you know, I guess strategy for them to think about how to actually start beginning with mindfulness?
I mean, it's a great question. There's a number of thoughts that come to mind. I think the breath is powerful. You know, I always start with the breath. So it's just going to, if I'm going to be authentic in terms of how I work with people, I think starting to learn how to breathe and even being aware of where you breathe. You know, most of us breathe very shallow. Whereas even if you just extend the breathing down into the belly, wow, powerful impacts on our nervous system. So, I mean, to try and answer your question simply, there are obviously many apps out there that do teach mindfulness. So if you're interested in learning to cultivate the mindfulness meditation, I think they're wonderful places to start. You can connect with a teacher if you really want a more sort of personal service where you can obviously get feedback, which is really quite important. You can find a teacher, and that's changed with, you know, virtual, you know, you can work with anyone in the world now, not just whoever's in your local area. But I think the simplest technique that I teach is just breathing. Just literally taking 3 deep breaths. And just observing that breath. If you want to practice it a bit longer, just keep your attention on that breath and just return to a normal, natural breathing. Just observe the inhalation of the breath in the nostril area. You can keep your eyes closed. Maybe this is even easier. And just watch the breathing. That's really all you need to do to get started. And then all you need to do is watch the mind, because the mind will do what the mind does, and the mind thinks. So I think if you can learn and get your head around the idea that, you know, the breath is a powerful force to anchor me in the present, and that my mind will think, and that's okay. Actually, that's a great opportunity to practice mindfulness. You already have a really powerful tool to get started. But I do think, you know, finding an app or, you know, learning with someone or some app is probably going to be a super way to move quickly through the learning. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, something that I practice this as well is you know, the picking a moment in the day, right? You know, where it's easy to anchor, especially when you're starting kind of a new habit, right? Is anchoring it to an old habit, right? Because there are certain habits that we have, and it could be, for example, driving to work, right? Every morning you drive to work at, you know, let's say 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is to use that time, you know, where you're either driving yourself or you might be in a taxi or something like that, to say this I'm going to use this time to focus on my breathing and centering myself and doing all of those kind of things. It could also be, you know, before every meeting, right? You know, if I'm going to, before every meeting, if I know I have a meeting, then before that meeting, I'm going to take 30 seconds or a minute, right, to focus on my breathing, right? And I think anchoring these kind of habits to existing habits just allows us to remind ourselves, because I think that is one of the challenges when we start something new, right? Is you know, you've gone through this whole day of craziness, going like, oh man, I forgot I was supposed to be practicing mindfulness today, and it didn't happen, right? You know, and so finding those opportune moments to just be able to kind of put that together with something that we're already doing, and then create a new habit from there, just allows us to at least get that into our day, right? You know, so we then from there can as we then start feeling the benefits of it, right, we start feeling like, hey, this stuff is actually really working for me, then it becomes easier for the mind to dedicate time and energy to say, okay, I'm actually going to, kind of really put some time aside to practice this at a kind of a more, dedicated level. I think that's one of the challenges that especially with everything being so virtual nowadays and so much digitization, so much screen time, it's very easy for the brain to just be completely distracted all day long, right? And I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. I mean, if we actually start seeing more and more accounts of just mental illness, right, from the COVID period that we're in right now. And I think it was a Harvard Business Review. Was it either or McKinsey Quarterly? They just came out with an announcement too, that the number of mental, illness challenges for people, just populations and people is just skyrocketing right now. So there's definitely great need, right? For some form of intervention and something that we can actually just kind of do and apply ourselves, keep ourselves safe. Right, just like we wear a mask when we're outside, or at least most of us do. It's important for us to also practice these things, so that we also make sure, and maybe even not only just for ourselves, but also for the people around us, right? Because their lives are going to be a lot better when we're in a state of centeredness and calmness and things like that, rather than, especially if you're living in close quarters. Right, and you're spending most of your day indoors, and you have to function together, finding that peace, with each other, and that patience, that takes cognitive energy, and somehow or another you're going to have to build that cognitive energy, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is to consciously do something, right? So I agree, yeah. So that's fantastic. Do you have, before we close up today, do you have any kind of tips for people who kind of want to reach out to you, that might want to hire you, or do something like that? What would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. That's really easy. Okay. Hopefully you can share a link. My website, scottdoughty.com. Okay. Either of those ways is a really easy way to connect with me. I want to add, if we have a moment, that what you described around habit formation is super critical. I meditate before I have my morning coffee, and that makes sure it gets done. So I love your suggestion there. That's really important. The overarching theme here, though, is there is a lot going on, right? We all need to be ramping up our self-care, to use the term, in a big way, because there is so much collective stress in society at the moment, and whether you feel it or not, it's impacting you. The things we have to consider, in addition to what we already had to do in our daily lives, is quite immense. So it may be subtle, it may not be felt, but it is building up in the system, using that analogy I gave before. So we need to cultivate more resources. It may be getting out in nature. I'm sleeping more. I have to, because I feel like I need it. So there's all these things that I personally think is super important for us to cultivate at the moment, to make sure we're not finished at the end of the workday, right? And I think you made a great point. And all of my clients, the one thing that's most common is they want to be able to switch off so they can be with their family after they finish. So, if we're going to cultivate energy to make sure that we're bringing our best to work, but also having a reservoir left over for ourselves and our family afterwards, that is, a really important theme particularly for this time that we find ourselves in.
Beautiful. Yeah. Awesome. Great way to close that one up, Scott. That's awesome. So our time is pretty much up. I want to thank you so much for coming today and sharing a little bit more about mindfulness and stuff like that. So for my viewers, if you're watching and you want to get in touch with Scott, I've been flashing his website around scottdoughty.com. and just get in touch. He's a great guy, very, very approachable, good teacher. So feel free to reach out to him, and he'll take good care of you for sure. So Scott, I want to thank you so much for coming today, for sharing with everybody. It's so generous of you, and I really hope that we'll be able to get to do something like this in the future again sometime. So thanks for coming, and I will chat with you again soon.
So everybody, thank you. No worries. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode today. I had a lot of fun. I'm a firm believer of mindfulness. If you're not practicing mindfulness yet, start now. And if you need to, contact Scott, contact me, and I'll help you. Get in touch with Scott. But if whatever it is, it is so important that we focus on self-care, and it is such an easy practice to be able to center ourselves and ground ourselves by simply just being with ourselves for a moment, without any judgment or expectations or anything like that, simply using that compassion. So that's all for me today. I want to thank you so much again for joining us in, and we will speak soon again on the next episode, which, by the way, is going to be about the power of language, and I will share more about that with you soon. Thank you so much for joining. See you. Bye-bye.